Today, we are diving into one of the most incredible true stories of survival and human conflict you'll ever hear, all from David Grann's phenomenal book, The Wager. It's a wild story about what happens when civilization just disappears, and all that's left is the raw, desperate will to live. Okay, so picture this. The year is 1742. A small group of men, emaciated, basically skeletons, wash up on the coast of Brazil. They say they're the survivors of a British warship, the Wager, that wrecked on some godforsaken island in Patagonia. And they tell this heroic tale of survival. But then, 6 months later, another, even smaller group of survivors from the same exact ship shows up in Chile. And their story? It's the complete opposite. They claim that first group were mutineers, murderers, who left them all to die. So you've got two groups, one shipwreck, and two totally different versions of the truth. The question is, what really happened out there? You see, at its heart, this is a story about storytelling itself. It really makes you ask, how do we remember the things we've done? We all kind of impose a narrative on the chaos of our lives, right? We pick and choose the details, polish the good parts, erase the bad, and we come out looking like the hero. It's how we live with ourselves. And for the men of the Wager, the story they told literally meant the difference between life and death. To understand how everything fell apart so spectacularly, we have to go back, all the way back to the very beginning, to 1740, when the HMS Wager set out on a secret mission against Spain. Let me tell you, from the moment this thing was conceived, it was an absolute disaster just waiting to happen. I mean, this mission was doomed before the ships even left the dock. The war itself, get this, was called the War of Jenkins' Ear, which is a whole other crazy story. The Wager wasn't even a real warship. It was this clumsy, repurposed cargo ship. And the crew, a lot of them were just kidnapped off the streets by press gangs. And to top it all off, before they could even set sail, a deadly typhus epidemic, they called it ship's fever, tore through the crowded decks.
And if you want to know just how desperate they were for men, the Navy forced 500 pensioners from a military hospital into service. These weren't soldiers. They were described as decrepit and miserable objects. Some were missing limbs. They were literally carried onto the ships on stretchers for a mission no one ever expected them to survive. It's just unbelievable.
And for the men who could walk, life at sea was, well, it was brutal. The writer Samuel Johnson just nailed it here. This wasn't some grand adventure. It was a floating prison where the captain's word was absolute law, often enforced with a whip, and you had the constant risk of drowning. So this cursed fleet finally heads out, straight into the deadliest waters on the entire planet, the passage around Cape Horn. Scurvy starts to ravage the crew. I mean, their bodies are literally falling apart. Old wounds reopen, their teeth fall out. It's horrific, all while they're fighting these hurricane-force winds and 100-foot waves. And in all that chaos, the clumsy Wager gets separated from the fleet and is just smashed to pieces on the rocky coast of Patagonia. So about 145 men survive the wreck. They crawl ashore onto this desolate, freezing, storm-blasted island. And it's right here, with the ship gone, that the rigid social order that governed their entire lives just completely disintegrates. The lines between officer and sailor, commander and crew, they start to blur, and then they shatter completely. To really get what happened, you have to understand this idea of the wooden world. A British warship was like its own little society, a floating fortress of order and discipline where the captain's word was law. It was a harsh system, for sure, but it worked. But here on Wager Island, the wood was gone. The jail had been broken open, and a lot of the men started to argue that, hey, if the ship is gone, our pay has stopped, and so has the captain's authority over us.
And the breakdown was just terrifyingly fast. I mean, within days, some men are looting the wreck for booze and getting drunk, while others are trying to salvage supplies. Starvation starts to set in. Factions form, pitting man against man. And before you know it, the first body turns up. Not a victim of the cold or the sea, but a man found shockingly mangled, probably murdered by a fellow survivor for his last scraps of food.
Amidst all this chaos, the captain, a guy named David Sheep, is desperately trying to hang on to his authority. He's still trying to complete his mission. But as his power slips away, he gets more and more paranoid, more volatile, and it all leads to this single explosive act of violence that becomes the point of no return.
So here's how it went down. A young midshipman, Henry Cousins, who was pretty popular but liked to drink, gets into it with the captain. Later on, Captain Cheap hears a pistol shot during a different argument, and he immediately assumes Cousins is leading a mutiny. So, in a blind rage, he storms out, finds the unarmed Cousins, shoves a pistol right in his face, and pulls the trigger. Now, here's the thing. Cousins doesn't die right away. He lingers for 2 agonizing weeks. But the act itself, a captain shooting one of his own men in cold blood, it just completely destroys any loyalty he had left. It gives the opposition, which is now led by this really charismatic and capable gunner named John Bulkeley, all the moral justification they need. They don't see their captain as a commander anymore. They see him as a murderer. So, this event sets the stage for the final act on the island. The castaways split into 2 warring factions, each with a totally different idea of how to escape. And this physical split leads directly to a battle of stories, a war of words, where each side fought to control the narrative and, save their own necks. And the 2 plans couldn't be more different. Captain Cheap, always the loyal officer, he wants to go north, find a Spanish ship, capture it, and heroically get back to the war. He's all about duty. But Gunner Bulkeley, the pragmatist, he has a much simpler idea, survival. He wants to go south, through the incredibly dangerous Strait of Magellan, and just sail the thousands of miles back home to England. So you have duty versus survival. That was the choice. And the majority sides with Bulkeley. In what is, let's face it, an undeniable act of mutiny. They finish building a larger boat out of the wreckage, they put their captain under arrest, and then they just abandon him and a small group of loyalists on the island. 80 men sail away, leaving 20 behind to face almost certain death. Now, here is the most astonishing part of this whole story. Against all odds, both groups, Bulkeley's party after this epic, insane journey, and Cheap's tiny group after being rescued, they both eventually make it back to England. So, the Navy holds a court-martial, they have both sides of the story right in front of them, they've got the mutineers, and they've got the captain. So, who is the hero? And who is the villain? And the verdict is nobody. They were all acquitted. It's just stunning. The court uses this legal loophole, basically that a crew's pay and obligations might end after a shipwreck, to essentially throw the whole case out. No charges for mutiny, no charges for murder. They just wanted this entire ugly mess to go away. So, with no official verdict from the court, the battle moved to the court of public opinion. Bulkeley, the gunner, was the first to publish his journal, a gripping story that painted him as a reluctant hero. Decades later, John Byron, that's the famous poet's grandfather, who stayed loyal to the captain, published his own terrifying account. But in the end, the British Empire just found a more convenient story to tell. It celebrated the triumphant return of the squadron's commodore, George Anson, who'd gone on to capture a Spanish treasure ship. That became the official story, and the dark, complicated, deeply human truth of the wager was basically swept under the rug of history. And this just leaves us with this timeless, kind of chilling question, which William Golding captured perfectly. When all the rules of society collapse, when we're pushed to our absolute limit, what are we really capable of? The story of the wager suggests that maybe, just maybe, the greatest dangers we face aren't the storms or the sea, but the darkness that lies within ourselves.